Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this, and welcome. I'm Larry Erickson. This is the Erickson Report. And we start this time, as I like to whenever I can, with some good news. And first up there is some good news coming out of the Biden administration. Now, much of what's come out so far has ranged from encouraging through disappointing to some downright ugly. But I wanted to mention something that's gotten relatively less attention than some other things, but that certainly qualifies as encouraging, and with one change could really become really good news. So on January 26th, he signed an order instructing the Justice Department to not renew contracts with private prisons, with domestic policy advisor Susan Rice saying quite accurately that these prisons profiteer off federal prisoners. They've also been found, by the way, to be less safe for both prisoners and prison guards alike. The downside is that the order only applies to the DOJ. It does not apply to the Department of Homeland Security, which uses private prisons to jail undocumented immigrants. Expand the order to include the DHS, and you've gone from encouraging news to, yeah, that genuinely is good news. Now, speaking of small changes that could make a difference, one difference could make 2021 a breakthrough year for women's rights. Some of you may recall the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, which would amend the Constitution to ban discrimination on account of sex. If you remember the amendment, you may also remember that it failed. Failed because, unlike any other amendment in our history that was submitted to the states, it set a time limit for ratification. In 1982, it ran out of time with just 35 of 38 states needed having approved it. It failed to overcome a right-wing campaign of lies and disinformation. And if you don't recall it, if you do recall the thing from a couple of years ago about all the horrors that would ensue if transgender folks are allowed to use the bathroom of their choice, it's the same kind of thing. Well, around 2015, a new push was started to get those last three states, and in January 2020, Virginia became state number 38. In response, the House of Representatives passed an extension of the deadline, which would enable the ERA to get passed, with 38 states approving. But Fish-Face McConnell refused to bring it to the Senate floor for a vote. But whether you say what a difference a year makes or elections have consequences, the fact is he no longer has the authority to do that. And so legislation to make the ERA part of the Constitution has been introduced in both the House and Senate, which means that 2021, it's the best chance the ERA has had in 39 years. And if that does work out, that would be truly good news. Next up, a case out of Alabama brings some encouraging news for transgender people. Alabama's driver's licenses, like that of all states, include a marker referring to a person's sex or gender. However, transgender people can't get a license in Alabama that reflects their gender identity unless they can present proof of having had what the state calls complete surgery, meaning both genital and top reconstruction surgery. Now, such surgeries not only carry risks, as all surgery does, but it may be unavailable, it may be unaffordable for a person, it may not even be necessary or even desired. Actually, for example, there is no reason that for example, biological male cannot perceive themselves as, present as, be perceived as, and live their life as female. In fact, only 25% of transgender and other gender nonconforming people have had any sort of such surgery, according to a 2015 survey on the topic. The case at hand began in 2018 when 3 transgender people sued the state of Alabama for not being able to get a license that reflected their gender identity. It reached an important milestone on January 15th when Senior Judge Myron Thompson of the Federal District Court for Middle Alabama declared the policy was an unconstitutional violation of the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause. By making the content of people's driver's licenses dependent upon the nature of their genitalia, the policy classifies by sex, Thompson wrote in his decision. Under Equal Protection Clause doctrine, it's subject to an intermediate form of heightened security. meaning that to treat people differently based on sex, in the words of the lawyer for the folks, they have to have a very good reason for doing what they did, and they didn't. With this decision, there are still 8 states and 2 U.S. territories that require proof of surgery to change a driver's license gender marker, and a number more that place burdens short of surgery on people who don't fit the physical definition of male and female. On the other hand, there are 20 states that allow people to choose the gender identifier that they feel defines them. 19 of those, you actually have the option of X for non-binary. So there is progress being made. Now, I call this decision a milestone, a marker, if you will, about markers, because Alabama says they intend to appeal, and being in the right-wing 11th Circuit, the final outcome is by no means assured. But nonetheless, it is still a victory, it is still a step forward, and that is still good news. Finally, for this time out, the Georgia State Legislature set a series of COVID-19 protocols for the 2021 legislative session, including a requirement that members and staff get tested twice a week at a site that they set up especially for that purpose. On January 26th, Gopper David Clark was escorted out of the Senate Capitol chambers for refusing to take the test. He also lost office space across the street from the Capitol until he agreed, quote, to participate in safety protocols and not put other members and staff in harm's way. Which means that one of the flock of self-important I don't wanna and you can't make me jackasses has actually faced some consequences for being a self-important I don't wanna and you can't make me jackass, which is overdue good news. All right, next up, we turn to one of our regular features, 2 weeks of stupid, clowns, and outrages. And we start, as we generally do, with the clowns. And our first clown is the U.S. Supreme Court. On January 25th, the court simply, and it appears without dissent, threw out everything related to suits over Tweety Pie's having violated the emoluments clause of the Constitution, that is, having profited off his presidency, which he clearly did, maintaining an active interest in his businesses and profiting off the foreign and domestic officials who sought to curry his favor by booking rooms at the Trump International Hotel. But the court just didn't care. The justices threw out Trump's challenge to lower court rulings that allowed the 2 lawsuits to go forward, plus ordering those lower court rulings being thrown out, as well as directing the 2 circuit courts involved to dismiss the suits entirely. Why? Because, the court said, Tweety Pie is no longer in office, so the whole matter is moot. There's no longer an issue in dispute. There's nothing to decide. This is stupid. According to Steve Vladeck, a CNN Supreme Court analyst and professor of law at University of Texas School of Law, quoting him, ordinarily the court pursues such a step only when the prevailing party moots a case while the appeal is pending. That is, when the side which won at lower court does something that removes the cause of the dispute, which clearly is not what happened here. And there is still an issue in dispute. Walter Schaub, as the former chief of the Office of Government Ethics, who called the decision a disgrace, or rather insane, he noted that Tweety Pie still has the money. And he said when any other federal employee violates the emoluments clause, they have to forfeit the money. Calling this case moot because Tweety Pie is no longer in office is like investigating a bank executive suspected of embezzling and saying you're going to drop the whole matter because they've taken a different job. So why was it mooted? Well, according to Vladeck, it shows that the court is increasingly willing to invoke this doctrine to avoid highly charged political disputes. In other words, it's because they don't have the guts to make the decision. What makes this even more idiotic is that there's another pending suit charging that Tweety Pie violated the First Amendment rights of people to petition the government by blocking them from his Twitter account. Some experts are saying the court will not use mootness to wipe away those lower court rulings that went against Tweety Pie because Blodden also has a Twitter account. What, and no future presidents will have business interests? No future president can violate the emoluments clause, and those that do can just keep the money? The Supreme Court has acted like damn clowns. Next up, on January 28th, hedge fund manager Leon Cooperman, with an estimated net worth of around $3 billion, reacted to retail investors who banded together to drive up the stock of GameStop, thereby wrecking a plan by short-selling hedge funds to profit by the company's failure. He did it by sneering at people, quote, sitting at home, getting their checks from the government, trading for no commissions. In other words, the unwashed, non-elite masses. He also denounced a financial transaction tax and other measures to battle inequality, calling the idea of a fair share, quote, a bullshit concept, unquote, and just a way of attacking wealthy people. Yeah, well, at least in going after clowns like Leon Cooperman, at least they're aiming at the right target. Next, the stultifyingly dense championship has been won by Jaime Allard, a member of the Alaska legislature who defended a license plate reading "Three Reich." In a Facebook post, Allard said, "If you speak the language fluently, you would know that the English translation is realm." Actually, empire is a better in-context translation, but no matter, because she continued by saying the progressives have put a spin on the word, created their own definition. Allard is now a former member of the Alaska State Commission on Human Rights. She insisted she was the target of unfair attacks, but agreed to resign in order to spend more time with her spend more time on her legislative duties. A trip to the Holocaust Museum might also be a good use of her time. Now, I had to include this last one. Last time I cited Terry Jones, a Gopher member of the North Dakota legislature, who introduced a bill under which any state form that asks for racial information had to include American as the first choice, which he claimed would unite people, including Black Americans, who, he said, are glad their ancestors were brought here as slaves. Turns out he's not a one-hit wonder. He has also introduced a bill that pretty much rewrites the dictionary in order to control how the state deals with LGBTQ issues. What the bill does essentially is declare that the very idea of LGBTQ rights is based on support of the supposed religion of secular humanism, and therefore any assistance to or even acknowledging the existence of LGBTQ people in any way is an unconstitutional ban on endorsement of religion. The whole thing is just, as someone called it, a conservative Christian bigot's fever dream, which is, after all, a natural product of being a clown. All right, next up, we turn to our outrages. And we have one outrage this time. It's the Blodden administration. Or actually, it is more limited than that. A number of domestic moves have been encouraging, some even better than I expected. But on foreign and military policy, it's a disaster and an outrage. Let me go through a few things in no particular order. For one thing, the Space Force, Tweety Pie's vanity project, apparently is going to continue. Once established, it quickly developed an institutional momentum, now preaching the fear merchant's classic line about emerging threats, just this time in space. And it appears that Blodden is of no mind to challenge that. On military spending in general, despite the fact that during Tweety Pie's regime, such spending rose 19%, Blodden is expected to resist calls from progressives to cut that budget in order to finance human needs, expected especially because even during the campaign, he said that if elected, he did not foresee any significant reductions. On Afghanistan, there were already indications that Blodden will keep U.S. troops in Afghanistan past a May withdrawal deadline that was set out in a deal the U.S. made with the Taliban. It appears the intention is to keep 2,000 to 2,500 troops there for counterinsurgency, apparently permanently, giving an interesting twist to the notion of ending our forever wars. Another forever war he is likely to continue is the drone wars. Now, this is a topic he's spoken very little about, but as vice president, he advocated for what he called counterterrorism plus in Afghanistan, a combination of special forces plus aggressive drone bombing. Now, I'm sure that there are those who will praise his plans for Israel and the Palestinians, but it only looks good by comparison to the horrendous Tweety Pie years. What he proposes is a return to the mushy all-talk, no-action support for a two-state solution, a policy pursued by multiple previous administrations across parties, one marked primarily by tut-tutting and tisking about Israel's oppression of the Palestinians, including turning Gaza into what was accurately described as the world's largest outdoor prison, building settlements, seizing Palestinian land, and demolishing Palestinian houses, while at the same time the U.S. provides Israel with billions of dollars in military support and deliberately refuses to use the leverage that gives us in order to enforce a settlement. Now, one more case to mention is Venezuela, where the Blad administration will continue to recognize Juan Guaido as president, part of a campaign to force out Nicolas Maduro, a campaign marked by crushing economic sanctions that have cost the Venezuelan economy an estimated $194 billion, reduced import earnings by 99%, and have resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Venezuelans due to the lack of medical supplies and equipment. Now, there's a lot more to this. I had originally intended to do a whole segment about Venezuela, but discovered to explain it properly, including the whole background, just kept expanding and expanding to a point beyond I felt I could deal with today. But know this, there is a great deal to doubt and question about Nicolas Maduro, but ultimately this is not and never was about him. The U.S. has been trying to undermine or overthrow the government of Venezuela since 1998, when the people of that country committed the unforgivable sin of electing the socialist Hugo Chavez. Maduro is not the actual cause. He is just the current target. Because ultimately this is not about democracy. This is not about free elections. It is about dominance and the bipartisan foreign policy consensus which Joe Biden embraces, and that is an outrage. And it's time for a break. And we're back. All right, to end the show, I've got something I like to go back to from time to time. With recent events, it seemed now is an appropriate time. It's my list of rules for right-wingers. The fact is, right-wing flakes, nutcases, and other wingers are almost the totality of the present right wing and almost the totality of the present Republican Party. For some time, I observed with varying degrees of annoyance and bemusement the predictable tactics the right-wingers use in debates, or rather to avoid debates. But I finally came to a point where I just had it. I was fed up with it. And so I started assembling a list of those tactics. So here it is, the always subject to change and revision list of wingnut arguing tactics and operating procedures, including a brand new one. And they are listed simply in the order in which they got added to the list. So, rule number 1, attack, attack, attack. In fact, try to level so many attacks so fast that your opponent never gets to make a criticism of their own because they're too busy trying to catch up with your attacks. However, don't forget to be deeply shocked and offended if anybody in the left responds in kind. Rule number 2, deny, deny, deny. Doesn't matter if it's something undeniable, deny it anyway. Rule number 3, when facts are beyond even your ability to deny, change the subject. It can be done in various ways. 3 examples. Introduce irrelevant details on a tangential point. Pluck out from what your opponent said some single phrase that you think you can attack, even if it was just, thrown out offhandedly, and treat that as if that's the focus of the entire discussion. Or tie up the discussion in piles of minutia to the point where everyone, including your opponent, loses track of what the original issue was. Rule number 4, issue a lengthy ranting denunciation of the left. This is often done in the form of whataboutism, responding to a legitimate criticism by ignoring it and instead going, yeah, well, what about, followed by whatever seems most useful to you at the moment. Be sure to include the words hypocrite or hypocrisy, arguing that the left can't legitimately criticize the right because by the definition you set, that would be by definition hypocrisy, while you can continue to criticize the left. Where possible, include the phrase, you liberals, or even better, you libtards. Rule number 5, make the particular stand for the whole. Find something offensive or silly some liberal or leftist somewhere, sometime said or did, and label that as identifying the entire left half of the American political spectrum. Demand that your opponents spend their time denouncing that example rather than discussing the original topic. Rule number 6, never answer a question. When faced with one, ignore it. Respond with a question, preferably on a different topic, preferably one accusatory. If you do get an answer to that question, repeat the question loudly and demand it be answered while continuing to ignore the fact that it actually has been answered. If necessary, just drop the whole matter entirely without ever acknowledging that your question was in fact answered. Rule number 7, no amount of proof is enough. Demand every remotely questionable assertion by your opponent to be proved in every conceivable detail, down to dates, times, places, and signed affidavits. Refer to all factual assertions by your opponent as just your opinion, even if your demanded level of proof has been supplied. Rule number 8, though, assert unsourced statistics and facts with great assurance. Or, more appropriately these days, present alternative facts. Reply to requests for proof by some variation of, you can look it up, thereby trying to put your opponent in the position of proving your case for you. Rule number 9, frame the debate in false choices. For example, do you support socialism or freedom? Rule number 10, accuse the accuser. You'd call this the I'm rubber and you're glue method. Insist, even in the absence of any foundation, that any criticism of you actually applies to your opponent. For example, if someone says you're avoiding debate, you say, you're the one that won't debate. Faced with examples of right-wingers lying, say, that fits you lefties to a T. If someone you said is challenged as being bigoted, say, you're being intolerant, or even better, you're the real racist. Rule number 11, when a claim of yours has been debunked, continue to use it nonetheless. When it has been debunked so thoroughly and completely that continuing to assert it is become counterproductive, stop claiming it for a time, after which claim it again as if the debunking had never happened. For numerous examples of this, see any climate denialist. Rule number 12, never accept responsibility. Never, never, never admit any responsibility for the meaning or impact of your own words. We've seen more than enough examples of this since January 6th. Rule number 13, when all else has failed, and even when it hasn't, just lie. Just make crap up. Now this next one is specifically for use in TV discussions. Rule number 14, when you fear a contrary point may be raised, shout. If that contrary point is a good one, shout very loudly. Your point may not get heard, but neither will your opponent's. Rule number 15, seize control of the clock of history. Choose the period of time most advantageous to your argument and insist that every event outside that time frame, whether before it or after it, is irrelevant and must not be considered. A rather recent example is Representative Marjorie Taylor, color of nausea, grousing how unfair it was for people to bring up things she said before she started actually running for Congress, which is doubly funny because she certainly supplied enough ammunition after she started running, but never mind. Rule number 16, you could call this the both sides now tactic. If the behavior of some right-winger is so undeniably bad that it can't be explained away, airily dismiss it with, both sides do it. Feel free to enjoy grossly false equivalencies in doing this. Rule number 17, all debate stops when you win and only when you win. The right wing only knows two responses to an issue. It's up for debate and we won, the debate's over, shut up. Gun control provides a good example. In the 2008 Heller decision, the Supreme Court found for the first time in U.S. history that owning a gun is an individual right. Ever since then, the gun nuts have been going, the Supreme Court has ruled, debate's over. But for the 69 years preceding that decision, the controlling precedent was that the Second Amendment was about a collective right of collective self-defense, not an individual one. In all those years, I don't think you could ever find a single gun nut, single NRA member who ever said, well, the Supreme Court has ruled, I guess the debate's over and we lost. Which brings up in turn rule number 18. If you can't win by the rules, change them. A great example of this is voter suppression. The right wing knows it can't win if the massive American public votes, so they've been on a years-long campaign to try to prevent anybody they think won't vote reactionary from voting at all. Rule number 19, intellectual consistency and honesty are for wusses and losers, which in a way sums up the whole thing. For a recent example, we have Fishface McConnell, who famously said his intent was to make Barack Obama a one-term president, proudly described the Gopper-run Senate as the place where progressive ideas come to die, and changed the filibuster in order to get a string of reactionary judges onto the federal bench, including the Supreme Court. Fishface McConnell, who is now whining and sniveling that if those mean old Democrats limit the filibuster, it will, quote, drain comity and consent from the Senate. If you want an almost too good to be true example, late in the evening of Election Day on January 12th, it looked for a short time that Barack Obama might lose the popular vote to witless Romney despite having won the electoral vote by a handy margin. In response, Tweety Pie sent out a barrage of tweets calling such a result a total sham and a travesty, and the Electoral College a disaster for democracy. Rule number 20, Sitzfleisch. It's German for sitting flesh, and it comes to the days before chess clocks put time limits on games, and players would sometimes win by just simply taking so long to move that their opponent would either just give up or become so tired from the wait that they would make foolish moves and lose. More generally, it can be taken to mean winning through sheer, unmitigated stubbornness. The right wing is a past master at this, just like any small child. And frankly, though, this is one rule that we should sort of adopt because we need to be as persistent as they are stubborn. All right, finally for now, a new rule that actually cuts across a number of the others and actually sums up the entire right-wing worldview. Rule number 21, always be the victim. Whatever it is, the right-wingers will insist that they are the real victims. They are the ones facing discrimination. They are the ones being oppressed. They are the ones whose free speech is imperiled. They are the ones being made fun of. They are the ones who can't get a decent break. What they actually are, of course, is a bunch of whining crybabies, which is why playing the victim comes so easily to them. Okay, I'll wrap this up with an observation one I've made before discussing this. I frankly expect many of us have at some time or another committed one or more of these sins in the course of a debate, especially if it got heated. But occasional sins in the heat of the moment is not what this is about. This is about a consistent pattern by the right of evasion and deceit. It's about being an intellectual coward. It's about being a bully. It's about being a liar. It's about being an American right-winger. So that's it for this week. We will see you again in 2 weeks. So for the moment, as always, you have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. Wear the damn mask. And as always, peace.